Welcome back to the Global News Relay. I'm Juan Avila.
And I'm Elsa Mejia. Let's send it over to the University of North Alabama.
And joining us is a representative from the university.
Yes, my name is Pat Sanders.
Hello, how are you doing, Pat?
I'm doing great. I am the advisor for the University of North Alabama's National Broadcasting Society Alpha Epsilon Rho group that produced our newscast.
So tell us a little more about the stories that you guys been working on and what was some of the things that stood out about those stories.
Well, my students chose to do the Women's March in Washington, and also one student did a piece with the Salvation Army on their efforts to help the homeless and those who are poor in our community. Also, we had one student who chose to do a man on the street type of interview where she just simply asked some students what came to mind when they thought of the word activism. So we had students do that, and they just wanted to get involved in this effort to talk about activism and also some solution journalism.
Was there a particular interviewee who stood out to you the most?
I think that Dr. Amber Polk, who is in our sociology department, really stood out very well in that she was at the march. Also, Dr. Jan Cradaville, who is a former professor, who is now a counselor in the community, but who is also involved in a lot of the social issues. I think that their interviews were very powerful in that they were able to talk about some of the things that they experienced in Washington, and also their efforts to get involved locally and to bring that back to a local emphasis and a ground roots effort and some things that are continuing in our community.
Well, thank you for joining us at this talk back. We're looking forward to seeing your stories. We've been talking with from the University of Alabama.
All right, thank you.
Now here are the stories they've been working on for the Global News Relay Solutions Journalism.
I'm Kiana Ray from the University of North Alabama. For Global News Relay, we cover stories about the Women's March on Washington, homelessness, and helping the poor. We also get the average man and woman's viewpoint through different voices. First, Morgan Hoover speaks with Amber Polk, an associate professor of sociology and family studies at the University of North Alabama. Dr. Polk took part in the Women's Rally on January 21st.
Thank you so much for sitting down with me today to talk about what activism means to you. But first, I want to get to know you a little bit better. So you're a professor here at UNA. How long have you been here?
I came to UNA in 2011. I'm actually from Florence and grew up in Florence, and did all my higher education at Auburn and spent my first couple of years at a university in Washington State, and then had an opportunity to come home. And so I was able to come back and join the Department of Sociology and Family Studies in 2011.
Awesome. So after being here for that long, have you noticed a lot of activism in this community?
Well, being a professor of family studies, I think that our entire agenda is about activism. It has to do more with children and families, obviously, but I think that it's an opportunity to get students involved, taking them out in the community, encouraging them to do internships, practica. What I am encouraged by, though, is around me incorporating other issues. So things that have to do with gender identity and sexual orientation, gender equality, things that when I first came here were more a part of my university in Washington that I've started to see happen here, which is really exciting.
So you recently attended the Women's March in Washington, D.C., so tell me about that. How did that get started?
Well, I firmly believe that activism is not just going to a march. It's something that we do every single day. For most people that went to Washington, this was just a celebration of some high fives of things that we're already doing and kind of showing ourselves, coming out from behind, the lectern or out of that social services center and coming together and saying, I'm with you, and we're going to keep doing what we're doing.
Marches have impacted our country?
Oh, absolutely. Again, not because I think that it's surprising that, you know, so many people feel this way. It's just that I think a lot of people that are out there doing the work are out there doing the work. I don't think that they're necessarily connected to social media and posting every time they go and do something. And so what I thought was neat was having a lot of people that do a lot of good work taking a day off to go and celebrate that we're, you know, we're not going to kind of be relegated to the side, that if we have our passions, we have our beliefs, there's a lot of us. And being in Washington and marching, I was thinking about other big marches like Martin Luther King and the Civil Rights March. What if all those people had said, you know, a lot of people are going, let's just stay home. You know, a lot of people will be there and probably be crowded. Other person, well, it means everything. I mean, and so it was just really, it was really incredible to see that. And I think that people seeing it around the world, people were marching in Antarctica. You know, I mean, I loved being in Washington, seeing people marching in Antarctica. And so I think it did change things because there's this awareness and validation that there's a lot of us, and just a reminder, a good reminder that we're out there.
Right. And social media, I think, has definitely helped this issue, and I see the hashtag everywhere, Why I March. So what is your hashtag Why I Marched reason?
Well, if you go on my Facebook page, you can actually see it, and it's my daughter. It's this great picture of my daughter, and she's got her arms raised up over her head. And that morning, we couldn't even find a hotel room in D.C., so we stayed in Baltimore and took a Greyhound bus from Baltimore to D.C. that morning. And we're sitting there on the bus, and I'm sitting next to my husband, and I'm like, there's so many reasons why I'm marching, and but that is the main thing. And so I just put a picture of her, hashtag Why I March, and tagged him in it. He was like, I'm not doing anything, tag me. And that really, at the end of the day, is about what it is for me. You know, one of my favorite quotes is Susan B. Anthony. We don't want to teach young women to be grateful. We want to teach them to be ungrateful, so they keep going. And being at the march for me, though, ironically, it was an act of gratitude for all the women that have marched, so that I can have that seat over there and teach at this university. And so I have a vote. And so it really, for me, is about keeping it going, showing gratitude and keeping it going, so that, you know, when my daughter, who's 4, she is 18 and she goes and puts in her first vote, is voting in a very different world than the one that was there for her when I was 18 and I cast my first vote.
Next, Dr. Jan Cradaville attended the march in Washington, D.C. the day after Donald Trump was sworn into office. She talks with UNA's Kendra Wallace about her experience.
Hi, my name is Kendra Wallace. There were over 1 million protesters gathered for the Women's March on Washington that took place January 21st. Today I have a special guest with me that attended the march, Dr. Jane. How are you today?
I'm fine, thank you.
Okay, so how did you hear about the Women's March and what made you want to go?
I first read about the Women's March on Facebook shortly after the election was over. As soon as I saw that there was going to be a march, I knew that I had to be a part of it.
Okay, so what happened at the march and what did you experience?
I rode a chartered bus out of Huntsville with 100 other women and men, and we drove all night and got to Washington, D.C. Saturday morning of the march. We'd heard that there were 1,200 plus buses that had come to Washington, D.C. for the Women's March. We went to the National Mall where the march was to begin, and all along the way I noticed how helpful everyone was. Churches were open to give water, food, use of restrooms, just support. People were out on their stoops in the front, waving, cheering us on. We saw signs. And perhaps a surprise to me was that the law enforcement that was there, I had been a little worried about the law enforcement, and especially with what we'd heard that had happened on the day of inauguration the day before. Mm-hmm. As we got closer to where the march was to begin, we became shoulder to shoulder. It was so packed. And probably for the better part of 3 to 4 hours, we were in a packed situation, waiting for the march to begin. But after a while, we realized the march wasn't moving. And we learned that the entire route was so packed and so full, shoulder to shoulder, that it couldn't move. And we took the march to the parallel streets and came down Pennsylvania Avenue by the White House and went by the Trump Tower as well.
Okay, so what were the pussy hats about?
The symbolism of the pussy hat, to me, especially in light of Mr. Trump's remarks about women and grabbing by the pussy, was not only to rebuke him for that, but to take the power back of that word.
Right. So were there any surprises at the march?
The positive surprises were the total support. It was one of the most unified experiences I've ever had with people. One of the negative surprises to me was there were more limited numbers of porta potties in some of the places where we went, and we realized that these others were roped off and wondered if they had been roped off as a way to make a statement about the march, perhaps.
So can you name a point in your life that that a man made you feel less of as a woman?
Yes, several experiences during my childhood, from being molested by a stranger in a grocery store to being molested at a carnival. I think it's a fairly common experience. But as a girl, as a woman, you know that something is horribly wrong, but feel ashamed to say much about it. There's usually not just one experience, but it's after the fact down the road you begin to realize that you're a part of an oppression going on.
Well, would you go back to the March on Washington?
Absolutely. I would go in an instant. I would find a way to go, and I would take many with me.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for joining me today, Dr. Jan, and I hope you keep marching for us as women, because we really appreciate it. For those who weren't able to make it, we were just watching, so thank you again.
Thank you for inviting me.
Now, what does the average U.S. citizen think about activism? UNA's Victoria Piepke posed the question, what immediately comes to mind when you think about the word activism?
When I think about activism, the first thing that comes to my mind personally is, in some contexts, is a large group of people all together for one cause, but I suppose it can be individual as well. As far as a specific cause, though, I would think maybe towards like women's rights, since that seems to be a very relevant topic nowadays, especially the rights of immigrants as well, given recent political circumstances.
Activism for me, like, it's not something that we can really do here. It's the first thing that comes to mind is like the Middle Eastern, like, women's rights movement currently, because, you know, over here, while it's not necessarily equal quite yet, it's definitely not as bad as it is in the Middle East. And I know it's growing more and more every day, that they're actively trying to fight against the regimes oppressing their rights to be just people.
For me, activism is equal rights, not just necessarily for race or gender, but for everybody. And another thing that comes to mind really in correlation with that is just standing up for something you believe in and doing right, I guess, not just for justice, just for the way things should be.
When I think of activism, I think of women's rights, whether that's the Women's March, you know, Planned Parenthood, birth control, anything like that.
From the University of North Alabama, I'm Victoria Piepke.
Last, Ben Bertling takes a look at the Salvation Army and how it helps the poor.
Located on Court Street, downtown historical Florence, sits a thrift store under the familiar name Salvation Army. Here is a local thrift store where people can buy clothes and much more at an affordable price. Salvation Army has 7,500 operating centers across the United States. These centers specialize in food distribution, disaster relief, rehabilitation centers, and a Wealth for Children's program. Benjamin Dole, an officer at the Muscle Shoals office, gave me a moment to talk about what the mission here is at Salvation Army.
I'm Captain Benjamin Dole. I'm with the Salvation Army here in Florence, Alabama, and I'm the commanding officer and pastor for the Salvation Army here in the Shoals.
Benjamin gave me a tour around the Muscle Shoals Center, I asked about his job and what Salvation Army does here.
Growing up in the Salvation Army, I kind of asked myself that question a lot, just to make sure that I keep in perspective what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. And it really boils down to one word: others. The Salvation Army strives to help and to serve others, people who are hurting, lost, hungry, without family or friends, those who are just in need. That's what we're about. That's what the Salvation Army is. It's others helping others.
By serving others, Salvation Army aids lower-income families and people by providing food and shelter. These resources are provided by donations and help from the community as a whole.
We're there to be that support for people just in need. And Salvation Army loves others, and that's who we're here to serve.
This has been Ben Bertling with the University of North Alabama.
Today, we've covered several viewpoints concerning activism. UNA student reporters covered the Women's March on Washington, the homeless, and helping the poor. From the University of North Alabama, I'm Kiana Ray.
Wow, those are definitely some powerful images about the March in Washington. What do you think?
I think it's good that people get to stand up for what they believe in here in the United States. So I think it's great. There are great stories about the Salvation Army as well. Coming up on the Global News Relay, journalism students from Mexico City show us how members of their community are coming together to find missing children.
Plus, popular musicians are using their platform to perform in an anti-Trump travel ban concert.
And how Buddhism in Japan creates an accepting community for same-sex relationships and transgender individuals.
At the University of North Alabama, we take pride in our community and the impact it has on our campus. We take pride in our programs and the impact they have on our students. And we take pride in our students and the impact they have on the world. Welcome to the Pride